everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of the Sci-Café. For those that are watching on Facebook Live, there is a large audience here. I will lodge one criticism, which is it is not as large as the last topic on AI, which had the benefit of including Tony Chan. So I would, anybody that's watching on Facebook Live, anybody who couldn't be here today and watches this on video later, please, all of these topics are very relevant and very interesting and I think very important to KAUST, and it's good for as much of the community to come out here as possible. So please, water security, KAUST is really positioned to be a global leader on this topic. The market for desalination, the market for a lot of these water technologies is here in Saudi Arabia, so this is a very important topic, and I hope that on all of these Sci-Cafés we get a nice turnout from the community to really listen to what our panelists have to say. So with that admonition first, I'd like to then remind you of how the Sci-Café format works. I'll have each of the panelists introduce themselves. We'll do a few questions so you can put them into boxes, so to speak, so you can understand what their areas of expertise are. And then it's, after about 15 minutes, it's free reign. You will get a water bottle out of asking a question, so you get a nice perk from the Sustainability Committee. So be thinking of your questions now on this topic for our panelists. So with that, I'll hand it over to them. I'll have them just say a few words about who they are and how did they come to this particular topic of water security, and what do you work on specifically in that area. So Matt, you want to start?
Okay, thanks, John. Welcome everyone. My name's Matthew McCabe. I'm a professor of remote sensing and water security here at KAUST. I've been here for around 6 years. My background is in civil engineering, so I'm coming from a very traditional sort of engineering background and training, but I've really focused on trying to estimate and quantify the amount of water that's used internationally and globally. And for the vast proportion of my career, that's what I was trying to do, is quantify the flows and movements of water at very large scales. And it's probably in the last 5 years or so, overlapping since the time I came here, that we've really drawn that focus back down to even farm scales. So trying to understand the quantification of water variables in the hydrological cycle, and particularly how that interacts with issues related to food security, which I'm sure is one of the topics we might touch on today.
Very good.
So my name is Payten Hong. I'm associate professor at the Environmental Science and Engineering program, and my research is hosted in the Water Desalination Reuse Center. So in KAUST, my research is primarily driven by two research pillars. One is really to understand the safety components related to treated wastewater. So we want to understand what are the emerging contaminants, primarily that of the microbial contaminants that may be present in the treated wastewater, asking ourselves what kind of treatment technologies are available to remove those microbial contaminants so that at the end of the day, those treated wastewater will be safe for reuse. And then at the same time, the second research pillar that we do in our lab is to develop anaerobic membrane bioreactor as a safe and sustainable way to not only remove the microbial contaminants from the treated wastewater, but to treat those wastewater in a sustainable way by recovering energy so that the entire treatment process would be sustainable for the long-term operation of the process. So that's essentially what I do, hopefully to provide the science to guide how we should manage and treat our water so that we can reuse those water to address water scarcity.
Very cool. Himanshu?
Well, hello. My name is Himanshu Mishra. I'm an assistant professor in the Environmental Science and Engineering program, and also a PI in the Water Desalination and Reuse Center. I've been here 4 years, and my research group, which comprises people from 9 countries, also has expertise in very diverse areas, including plant science, chemical engineering, organic chemistry, quantum chemistry, and aeronautical engineering and mechanical engineering also. I've been here 4 years, and our group's focus really has been at looking at interfaces of water and how they play interesting roles in physical, chemical, and biological contexts. Here, in the context of water security, I must say I am new. I'm my work in this field has been rather new, and I'm going to share more about it with you. But I think, I grew up in India for 22 years and then moved on to go to higher education in the US. Water scarcity is kind of embedded in lives of people in India. I mean, I grew up thinking that you just get water 2 times a day for half an hour, just 2 times, one time in morning, one time in evening. That's how it was. My parents were amazing at collecting that water and making sure that there was no domestic problem. We would get all cooking, bathing, all things done very nicely. I just never felt the stress. They were just really, really good. Sometimes when you don't even get that 2 times, then I was asked to go with a bucket to a nearby hand pump and collect some water. It was fun because I had to do it only once or twice. Some people perhaps had to do it every day. So this is a very timely, very important discussion that we'll talk about. And I hope to share some, as I said, we look at physical, chemical, biological contexts where water is involved. But then once we get those important scientific insights, we apply them to the toughest and the most challenging problems. So here is one example that you will hear more about in the coming moments. Thank you.
So let me just attempt to put them in boxes, and then I have a follow-up question on some of the boxes. So Himanshu, I would put in the box of really being out on the bleeding edge, and as he said, looking at interfaces, looking at the interactions between water and different surfaces. If you're, I don't want to give away your punchline, but if you're trying to create very cost-effective ways to handle water, purify water, move water, interact with water, he's on that bleeding edge of things out in front. Hence the multidisciplinary group of material scientists, quantum chemistry, etc. Payten, as she said, is in this area of water reuse, specifically the biology, making sure that the small things that we might overlook in existing reuse technologies or in developing reuse technologies don't become a problem when we start to reuse water more broadly. Because if you spend a ton of energy trying to desalinate water, for example, in Saudi Arabia, you'd like to reuse as much of that as possible. And I think this is a real opportunity for KAUST and for the kingdom. And Matt is on an even larger scale. And I'm going to ask some questions about how do you even track things on the scale of a country and things like that. But looking at water use, evaporation, everything, the whole cycle, as far as I understand it. So, Himanshu, why don't you say a little bit about how understanding the interfaces can help you to develop even products like the one you have next to you?
Yeah, sure. So I must say, when I started at KAUST, I was studying air-water interface. And during the last 4 years, because of my very, very clever colleagues, such as those here, I have dipped my toe now in water. So I used to be the interface guy, and now I'm also interested in real bulk water also. If you look around nature, I think nature serves as a really great platform to look at how interfaces are in action. A large number of insects and plants, they have over the course of billions of years evolved really amazing strategies to live their lives and, for instance, collect water from fog, for instance, walk on water, for instance, jump from the surface of water, and so on. So they could also serve as a very nice examples for designing technologies. Regarding how you want to move water by interfacial engineering, I mean, one really nice example could be there are very interesting spider webs where when water condenses, it moves in a specific direction. So one could, for instance, learn from it and direct water going a certain way. This is an example of, this is what we call, it looks like sand, ordinary sand. But each grain of this sand is coated with an organic, low-cost chemical. The inspiration for this work came from insects, for instance, halobates, which live in the ocean. They don't live in water, they don't fly. They just live on the surface of water. Waves break on them, birds attack them, fishes eat them. They are under constant stress, so they really have to run, escape, jump. Yeah? So they have some amazing strategies. So we study them, we learn their secrets, and then we apply those insights to these very simple materials like common sand and wax. And with this, we are developing technologies to, for instance, reduce irrigation requirements in agriculture. So this is one example.
So your way of tackling water security is to make sure we get the same agricultural growth, for example, with less water evaporation, less water usage.
That is right. We have been doing field trials for the last 3 years, along with a multidisciplinary team of plant scientists, agronomists, hydrologists, and so on. And we have demonstrated that for the same amount of water for tomato and barley crops, we can enhance the productivity of these plants by up to 70% using the same amount of water. This is a multi-year trial with multiple crops. And right now, we are looking at its application for trees, for example, date palms, and also for local varieties of trees. So these trials are going on right now.
Very cool. Paying, maybe you could say a little bit about some of the interesting bacteria or some of your concerns that may be in that reuse cycle and how you try and address those.
Right. So maybe let me just start off with the big picture. So for instance, majority of the non-renewable groundwater supplies that are being used now in the global scale, 80%, about 70 to 80% of them are actually being pumped up for agriculture irrigation. And when you do it for agriculture irrigation, basically there's really not much of a good way to recover those water. They just get evaporated and lost into the atmosphere until it falls back as rainfall in other countries, not so much in Saudi Arabia. So essentially, whatever agricultural practices that we are practicing is losing the non-renewable groundwater supplies and having a very minimal recovery of those water supplies. So a rough estimate, a very old estimate, is that about 53 million cubic meters of those non-renewable groundwater is pumped up per day for agriculture irrigation in Saudi Arabia. And yet, if we consider the natural recharge rate of groundwater in Saudi Arabia, it's only about 4 million cubic meters per day. Of course, maybe Matt has more updated statistics, but mine is the old updated statistics. But if you do a simple mass balance like that, it goes to show how unsustainable it is. So that kind of motivated us to try to explore alternative water supply. Of course, one can consider how about just desalinate water and then have them for agriculture irrigation. But we all know that trying to convert seawater into fresh water is an energy-intensive process. You require a huge amount of energy to get rid of those salts and push water molecules through the reverse osmosis membrane to convert them into fresh water. So that's also unsustainable in the long term. So then, obviously, a cheaper way would be to look at the use of wastewater. I mean, wastewater is just a terminology. We already do have the technologies to convert what is so-called wastewater into water of good quality so that we can reuse it for agriculture irrigation. And in fact, a rough estimate is that about everyone in Saudi Arabia uses about 265 liters per day. And we have a rough estimate of about 33 million population in Saudi Arabia. So if you do a simple math, which I was doing in the morning today, is that you could get, if we can fully capture all those wastewater that is generated from individual households, we could recover about 9 million or 8.6 million cubic meters per day. And that water could easily be tapped into the agriculture irrigation, substituting about 15% of those groundwater that has been pumped out for reuse, and allow the groundwater aquifer sufficient time to recharge naturally, and hence delaying the process of depleting the groundwater aquifer. So all these things are something that we know we have the problems, and we know that we need to address that, and we already know that we have the technology to treat those treated wastewater to a quality that's actually very good for reuse. And why is it that people are still hesitant about reusing those water? And I think majority of those hesitation comes from the fact that we don't know what the quality of those water is. And that's why we are really trying to provide the scientific evidence to use a scientific guided approach to know to what extent do we need to treat and remove those contaminants so that it's safe enough with very minimal risk. We're not going to say that it's risk-free. We're going to say to what level is minimal risk such that people can accept it. And in order to do that, we need to know what are the contaminants there, what are the microbial contaminants there. How do we know what is their fate and persistence, their behavior, and how the treatment technologies remove those things. And at the end of the day, we want to use those scientific knowledge to guide us to decide what are the treatment technologies that should be put in place so that we can significantly bring down the risk to a level that's acceptable for us. So with this approach, we actually started investigating the local wastewater, and we found that there are some emerging contaminants. Most of the wastewater treatment process that is available in Saudi Arabia, they actually do meet the requirement for discharge purposes. But when we looked at those contaminants that are not within the regulations, we start to see new stuff, what we call emerging contaminants, and those are possibly the ones that we really should find out more about it and develop strategies to try to bring down the risk. Yeah.
Very cool. All right, maybe you can say something, Matt, about the technology you're using and exactly what you look at a farm scale or even more broadly.
Yeah, I think it's been touched on a little bit already. But essentially what we try and do is observe and quantify the water used in our Earth systems. And when we're talking about freshwater use, globally the biggest freshwater use is through agriculture. So we focus a lot of our attention on agriculture. Payten just mentioned around 70 to 80%, and that's pretty much spot on. In Saudi Arabia, it's actually a little bit more. So if you want to talk about water security, you really have to address that area. How can we improve the amount of water or reduce the amount of water that we use in the agricultural sector while increasing the amount of food that we can get from it? So Himanshu already talked about some of his innovative technologies in trying to boost the production with a smaller amount of water or reducing the amount of water being lost from that system. Because this is a critical issue going forward when we talk about another 2 billion people by 2050 and having to feed that. So an increase in food production of up to a minimum of 50%, but with an increasing water scarcity globally. So these are all very pressing concerns. So what we're trying to do is really quantify and then be able to predict going forward in time where these water using aspects of our agricultural sector can be reduced. And the sort of base level question you want to ask is how much water is being used in agriculture in the instance? At a field scale, can we reduce, by more efficient delivery of that water system, the amount of water being used to produce the same or more amount of food? So there are some really fundamental questions that we've, are using satellites, space-based Earth observing systems, as well as ground-based and UAV systems to try and get a handle on agriculture, not just in Saudi Arabia, but globally. Now, when we started doing this, there was a lot of unknowns in that I would have thought were pretty basic. Like how many centre pivot systems, these are what we use to grow our large industrial scale agriculture, how many centre pivot systems are there in Saudi Arabia? No one knew. And this is, well, every other country should know this, but no one globally keeps a track of centre pivots. And if you want to look at food security and water security, you've got to know how many centre pivots there are to begin with. So we started using machine learning techniques to go and count all of the centre pivots in Saudi Arabia, and there's about 31,888 as of last week or so. Right, now we want to do that globally, because if you've got those numbers, you can actually start providing sort of very basic back-of-the-envelope estimates of how much water is being used in those industries, what's the food and crops being grown, and what's the projection for that in the future. So that issue of water and food security is sort of intimately linked.
Yeah, very, very cool. I think they've done a good job of explaining their expertise. What do you want to know from them? Remember, you get a water bottle out of the deal. Yes? Oh, wait. I'm supposed to toss you this. And Carmen's going to follow up with a water bottle.
So I would like to know something more about the emerging contaminants. Are they like biological, chemical, or heavy metals?
So yeah, so there's a wide spectrum of emerging contaminants, given the fact that municipal wastewater, of course, compared to industrial wastewater, is less complex. But the complexity of the municipal wastewater depends on what we eat on a day-to-day basis. Nowadays, everyone is consuming pharmaceutical products and having triclosan or anything that is antibacterial in our daily products and so on. And all of this, where does it go? It goes through the water as you wash your hands, it goes down as you poop and you urinate on a day-to-day basis, and they all get flushed into the sewage systems, and they all end up in the municipal wastewater. So when we consider that carriage from the humans based on our increasingly complex diet and the supplements that we eat, all of these are ultimately going to end up in the municipal wastewater. So when we talk about emerging contaminants, of course, there are the chemicals, there are the microbial agents, because there's an interaction between the chemical components with that of the microorganisms. For instance, antibiotics can select for antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So as my training is more in terms of applied microbiology. For the start, I focus mainly on microbial contaminants. So when I talk about emerging contaminants, I'm primarily focusing on the microbial contaminants. But it doesn't mean that it's just exclusive to microbial contaminants. There's actually a lot of chemical contaminants that are present in the municipal wastewater. And it's very important to understand to what level should we treat the wastewater so that the toxicity is low enough when we reuse, or the risk incurred from those antibiotic-resistant bacteria or pharmaceutical compounds are low enough that it's acceptable for us within a lifespan of 70 to 80 years of human life that it's okay to reuse those water.
So I just got to follow up. Some of this technology exists, right? I mean, I've seen plenty of media clips where some politician drinks treated wastewater,
Which
right?
is what we do in Singapore.
Yeah, so maybe it's not a Saudi Arabia specific question, but wherever you're going to deploy reuse technologies, what is the real limitation? Is it the economics? Is it the public perception that they're worried about contaminant? I'm curious.
To me, I think the bottleneck is not so much in the technology, because the technology is already there. If you really want the so-called a very foolproof way is to implement multi-barriers technology. You can have multiple barriers of technology, each achieving a certain percentage of log removal, and have, let's say, 10 of them in series, and I'm sure you're going to get a very clean water. So to me, I don't think the bottleneck is in technology. The bottleneck is in terms of economics, because it depends on the purpose of your reuse. If you're going to reuse it for agriculture irrigation, what you don't want is that you don't want to treat the water to a level that is so pure that it's actually suitable for drinking water, and you're not going to drink it, you're actually going to pump it into surface reservoir or groundwater, which has microorganisms. And so it doesn't make sense that you treat the water to a level that is purer than that of groundwater, and having that pure water go into groundwater to pump out for agriculture irrigation. So that's a trade-off in terms of the economics. To what level should you treat the water so that you think it's good enough without incurring substantial cost?
But I guess at like a high level, for example, you can always desalinate if you're next to a body of water.
Right.
So are the costs of reuse significantly less than the cost of desalination?
Definitely. I don't know I don't know offhand the cost.
Yeah.
But as I said, if you have desalination, the amount of energy that is required, at least with the current technology, the amount of energy that you need to desalinate the wastewater, convert them to fresh water, is way much higher than that of the treated wastewater.
Got it.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think this is actually the core of the problem. We don't value water.
Yeah.
You know, we literally don't value water. When we're growing our food, it's free. We pump water out of the ground, and we don't account for it because we don't care how much we use because it's free. The only way to conserve is to put a price on it. So when you talk about desalinated water, it's about $1.50 or $2 a cubic metre. But how much do you pay for water in Saudi Arabia? Yeah, it's a very small amount. I don't even know. I know in Australia it was about $1.50 for 1,000 litres, $1.50 a kilolitre. In South Africa they've just increased it. It's around $2.50. Right? But here it's very small amount. In other countries where they rely on groundwater, it's completely free. So until you put a value on something, you're not going to conserve it.
I'm sensing some taxation and ethical questions coming. Yeah, Amr.
Okay, first is a comment and then a question. So, comment on what you said about we value water. I think we value it when we start losing it, or when we feel the scarcity, basically. The question is about integration. So maybe just zooming out a little bit. In Saudi Arabia, I think most of the water consumption in irrigation is going to palm trees, especially in the central part of Saudi Arabia. What if we started integrating both themes that we see, or technology, the special sand that we see over here and the treated water, and we use that in irrigating palm trees? Is there a plan to do some collaboration on palm tree irrigation in Saudi Arabia as a start?
Very cool.
Thanks.
Himanshu.
Well, right now, as I mentioned, we do have some field experiments going on in collaboration with a team at KAU Jeddah, King Abdullah Aziz University in Jeddah, and we are testing the efficacy of this technology on those systems. For small plants, for instance, shown here, if the roots are not very, very deep, and then if you apply our technology on top, then you can really enhance the soil water content in the root region. So as a result, plant has more moisture available, so it can uptake nutrients better. If it gets too hot, it can transpire more. But what will happen if the roots are really, really deep? Now, roots are also known to be very opportunistic. They are very plastic. So if somehow you can change the concentration of water moisture, the roots will start regrowing, adapting to the enhanced water moisture. So this experiment is going on right now. And just for completeness, if people did not understand how this thing works, maybe I can just spend two more minutes on this.
1 minute.
So this material, this is a nature-inspired material and it is composed of two things, which are quite common and inexpensive. One is sand out in the desert, and other is paraffin wax, which is a byproduct of the oil refining. And each grain is coated with just a nanoscale coating of wax, such that using 1 kilo of wax, you can coat up to 1,500 to 2,000 kilos of sand. Yeah? Sand is virtually free. You just have to haul it. That's a cost. Wax is 1 kilo, $1. Yeah? Now, this material is so water repellent. This is water with some food coloring. And if I throw it on top, it does not go in. Whenever you went to the beach, sand was always wet. Look at this. This is water sitting on it like a pearl, and it will keep sitting here until it evaporates completely. It will not go in. Now, when you apply this material on top, since this material is very water repellent, liquid water does not rise up by capillary action or wicking or so on to experience the dry air or the solar radiation. As a result, the loss of liquid water through evaporation is really minimal. So this is how this technology works.
So you've basically created a barrier, and you only put it around the roots so that water can come into the soil through watering and other means, right? But then if you try and have the evaporation come up in this area, it'll be blocked and it remains in the soil content.
Yes, that's a very good question. So to use this technology in a very nice way, what we do is we take the irrigation line and we bury it slightly under the ground so that so in that way the use of water, every single drop of water is used to its maximum efficacy. And as my student says, if there is anywhere in the world water is more precious and more expensive, it is here. So if we can demonstrate about 70% enhancement in food productivity for tomato and barley in real field-scale experiments, we are quite optimistic about its potential globally.
To address your comment more broadly, Amr, Tony Chan and I were actually in Riyadh yesterday, meeting with the Minister of Environment, Water, and Agriculture. And there's a very nice synergy with them and with many of the other ministries. But I think the minister yesterday realizes this is not something that KAUST can solve alone, and the ministry has a lot of resources to collaborate with us to help us scale some of this technology. So whether you're talking about water security or saline agriculture or any of these topics that you often see in the Sci-Café, the faculty and KAUST administration, we're trying to build those bridges because there's no way we're going to be able to scale Himanshu's technology all across the kingdom. But at least we've kind of given it a start and we've collaborated with the people who can. Any other questions? Yeah, behind you there, Amr.
Thank you. I think there's a good saying in Dutch. It sounds something like, if you want to change the world, start with yourself. And I think that certainly applies to the sand, Sandex or super sand. Why not apply it at KAUST? We waste so much good water for irrigation. It's annoying. It's really annoying. Every morning my scooter is wet, not from the rain. So, John, let's do it here. Yeah?
Well, actually, the person you should be talking to is the one who asked the previous question. And it's actually one of the things, I'm going to call him out in public here, but Amr and others from facilities management, I think, have come to these Sci-Cafés. I think they work closely with our faculty. I know in the strategic plan that's being developed here at KAUST, the idea is to use this as a test facility for things ranging from autonomous vehicles to water security to desert agriculture. So I think that's coming. I think it's just a matter of you have to take the technology to a certain stage to make sure that it's even ready to be used here at KAUST. And then by testing it in a pilot here, you're now ready for somebody to scale it even further than that. So maybe you have some experience. Maybe you guys have already done some of this here at KAUST.
Well, I could add. In our small lab here at KAUST, in the year 2018, we produced over 10,000 kilos of this material. Our field site is, that area is of the order of 900 meters square, and that is one of the sites, and then the date palms are at other place, and then there are two more local varieties, Sidr and one more local tree, with which we are testing the efficacy of this material in another province in Saudi Arabia. I would also like to recognize my friend Katerina, who has been kind enough to test this material in her pots in her house. So we do have, and it is working, she says. She's a happy customer.
Well, I mean, we do have the plans to scale up some of our reactors, and I think that's definitely, as you said, I think we can only be confident to go out and there and say that our technology is working if we translate some of our lab scale stuff to scale up versions and really demonstrate again what we have observed in the smaller versions work in a bigger system before we can go out there and say it's working, and that we could, foster something that can truly make an economic contribution to the kingdom.
And I think to Matt's area, I hope I'm not jumping the gun, but we do have a field lab in development where Matt and Himanshu and others are going to be able to try out some of this here at KAUST. And so I think that's even a step. But I take your point, Paul, as being, let's try some of this in the community. Let's really practice what we preach, right?
So, Paul, I'll add to that. There's the English equivalent of that is be the change you want to see. Okay. And, I think about this because I look at the quantities of water that we use. And, when you think about domestic supply, okay, it's probably only 10% or so of the actual total volume of water that's used. But what we eat, there's a huge amount of water encapsulated in that. And it's actually not dates that are the big users of water in the kingdom, it's fodder that goes to produce the feed for cattle that either produce milk or produce meat. So every time you go to the supermarket and buy your litre of milk, there's 1,000 litres of water wrapped up into that. And every time you enjoy your steak from the new steakhouse that's going to come to campus, there's 4,500 litres of water trapped up in about a 400-gram bit of steak.
Yeah, just process that one for a second. What's the numbers again?
4,500 litres of water for a 400-gram steak, because that cattle has been alive for a good year and a half or so, if it's lucky, and it's been eating non-stop the fodder that we grow here in the kingdom and elsewhere to produce that little steak. So be the change you want to see. No meat Fridays. And as an individual who loves meat and long showers, I'm not the change I want to see, but I do think about it.
Hey, I think the person who said it was Gandhi from India.
Adopted by the English.
Very good. What other questions are out there? Now we're hitting on the interesting part of the conversation. Come on.
Mama.
Yes. Can you pass the microphone there?
And are we giving these guys free water bottles?
Yeah, I mean, the water bottle was part of the deal here.
Yeah.
Practice what you preach. There you go.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think when looking for the root cause of the problem, that means, is it actually needed to pump that huge amount of groundwater for plantation? I mean, why is not 30%? Why is not 50%? It's more than enough. I think one of the main problems that groundwater wells here in farms are not regulated or monitored in terms of flow rate being pumped.
So this is true most everywhere in the world, though. This is not just a Saudi-specific problem. And we have a project with the ministry where we're actually trying to quantify how much groundwater is being extracted by all of the cropping systems throughout the kingdom. But you can go anywhere in the world where irrigation is practiced, and almost without exception, the groundwaters are depleting. And this is a major red flag for food security going forward into the future. So it's not simply a question of, okay, let's use less water for agriculture, because if we want to have the food that we need to supply to a growing population, irrigated agriculture only accounts for about 20% of all agriculture, produces about 40% of all the food. So it's an incredibly important component of that food and water web. Now, if you just rely on rain-fed agriculture, Well, there's major challenges with that going forward into the future as well, because our croplands, overlapping where we're looking at changing patterns of rainfall, are very much at threat to those climate-induced variations in rainfall that's feeding these crops. So there's no great reliance on the rain-fed agriculture to provide the basic cereal crops that we rely on for food security.
Wait, so only 20% of agriculture is irrigated?
That's right.
And that consumes 70 to 80% of all groundwater used?
Well, agriculture is not just irrigated agriculture. Okay. There's farming practices, there's cattle and everything. So it's agriculture as a whole.
Got it.
But the 20% of irrigated agricultural land produces 40% of the food, which is an incredible amount. Yeah. So you're never going to be able to move away. But the really concerning fact is that for any of those systems where irrigated agriculture is occurring, the groundwater is depleting at rapid rates.
So is this something where somebody's going to propose a water tax, like a carbon tax? Is that the direction? Because this seems to be then a policy issue that needs to be resolved.
Well, there are big policy issues. So Australia Arabia is addressing this head on, and it's one of the few countries that actually is, because they had an effort to ban fodder crops. So from 2015, they outlawed the banning of the production of wheat. Okay, Saudi Arabia was a big wheat producer, so they stopped that. This year will be the last year that fodder crops will be able to be produced in the kingdom. And that's great. But what are the crops being replaced with? If they're being replaced with other crops that are less water efficient than soybean or lucerne or wheat, then it doesn't really solve the problem. What we're seeing up in our Julf is that they're ripping out fodder crops and replacing them with millions upon millions of olive trees. Which is okay. Olive trees don't use as much water as fodder crops. But that's still an amount of water that's going to be consumed from an agricultural production. And when you talk about a food security policy, just changing how you do agriculture is one aspect, but the Middle East as a whole imports a huge quantity of food. And when you look at the maps of where that food comes from, they're big red areas of groundwater depletion. So the security of that virtual supply of water that we're using, that we're importing food, is at risk. So the Great Plains of Argentina and Australia and Russia, where they're growing wheat from groundwater that are being imported to multiple other countries, they're at threat locally. So there's some big challenges that policy can't happen on a national level. It has to happen on an international level.
John, I would like to add something.
Yeah.
So it was a very nice question. Why is it that our agricultural operation is sucking up so much water? Why we live on this planet, which is the blue planet, has so much water on it. 70% of the surface is covered by water. Why do we have these water issues? So I'm going to, as I said, my expertise is water, not really water security. So I'm going to delve a little bit on water, the molecule itself. So this bottle of water in my hand here says that it was manufactured in 2018. It puts a number. So I'm just going to throw out a question. How old is this water? Quick question. Kennedy, how old is this water? Less than a year. So it turns out this water is older than me, is older than all the people here. This water is older than...
Cumulatively.
Older than dinosaurs. This water is older than the planet Earth. This water might even be older than sun itself. These molecules here are really, really old. We do not make any new water on this planet. These are the cards we are dealt with. That's all we have to live with. One part. Now, whenever you irrigate your plants at your home and stuff, you just take the clean water and you put inside the plant. You never take water and add salt to it and give it to the plant. Nobody does it. That means ocean and salty water in the ocean, you can't even, that's really, really salty, half a molar salty, very, very salty. You cannot use that salty water for planting, for agricultural operation, most of them. How much is this water on the planet? Imagine a big ball. How big? With a diameter between Jeddah to Riyadh, a big ball, a blue ball, sitting on Saudi Peninsula. That is all the water there is on the planet. All the water, including the water in my mug, in my cat, and in me. all the water there is. Clean water, fresh water, all water. That's it. So compared to the planet Earth, which has a radius of 6,400 kilometers, you have only a little ball with a diameter of 1,300 or so kilometers. That's all the water you got. How much fresh water we have is a much smaller ball of size about 200 kilometers or so. That's it. That's all the fresh water there is on the planet. That's why when our population in last 12,000 has increased by a factor of about 2,000. And in 10,000 BC or so, we were just 4 million people. That's it. Up until 1880, does anybody know in 1880 how many people were on the planet?
1 billion.
About 500 million. Since then, this number has gone crazy. It's almost going to touch 10 billion. We were less than 10 million in just 10,000 years ago. You know, Earth is old, very, very old.
But Himanshu, you know, a sphere the size of 1,400 kilometres from here to Jeddah to Riyadh or Jeddah to Dammam, that's still a lot of water. Okay, we're talking about 1.5 billion cubic kilometres. So if you think of a cubic kilometre, 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre of water, there's 1.5 billion of those. So it's a lot of water. And even if you take out the amount of fresh water, which is less than 1% of that we can actually access, it's smaller than 1%, that's still a huge volume of water. Certainly enough to water everyone that the world is probably ever going to see. We don't have a water quantity problem, we have a distribution problem. Okay, it's a problem of geography. It's not evenly distributed. So we have water-rich areas and water-poor areas, and there's no surprise which area we live in. It's a water-poor area. So this is where one of the big challenges is that it's not evenly distributed. How do we access the water in those locations that are water-rich? Well, you can't, because it's just, you can't run a pipeline from here to Antarctica. You know, we've got 2 kilometres of fresh water sitting on top of Antarctica. Short of a massive climate change, we're not going to see that released into the system. But there are physical problems and physical barriers.
And there's also approaches that people are taking here. You said 99%-ish with salt water or brackish water. To make that drinking water or agricultural water, you have to desalinate it 99.9%, right? You're the chemist, you'll give me the proper molarity. But the idea for some of the research that's happening here at KAUST is to maybe we could desalinate to 95%, take out 95% of it, or 90%. And from what I understand of the process, the cost savings there would be significant, but you have to have crops that are able to tolerate that sort of saline agriculture, right?
Yeah. So the plant science group, Mark Tester, we're working in collaboration. They're looking to try and develop crops that can unlock that potential. The brackish water supplies. Because to desalinate brackish water is a lot cheaper, obviously, than trying to desalinate highly concentrated seawater. All right, so developing crops that can operate on slightly saline water would really open up a lot of these marginal water reserves that we have available, including in Saudi Arabia, for crop production.
And how close is that to becoming reality? I mean, seawater is, what you say, 0.5 molar? I mean, how much can the best crops take in terms of salt water?
Well, Mark's exploring quinoa.
Yeah.
Quinoa is the crop of the future, if you believe the press. But there's quinoa experiments going on in Australia, in China, here, in Saudi Arabia.
I actually talked to Mark today. He's in Bolivia.
Yeah,
because that's where they're growing some of the quinoa at altitude.
So quinoa is incredibly salt tolerant. It's like watered down seawater, and it can survive and thrive with an incredible quantity of salt in the water. So in terms of a future crop, that has great potential. But is it going to feed the world? Well, I hope so.
Yeah. Got time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Yeah, Faysal.
I think I have 2 questions. Not that I want 2 bottles of water, but one is that I do understand that there are a lot of policies need to be looked into it. I want to know what happened with Vision 2030, how we are addressing this issue in terms of what policy we need, Especially, I know that for wastewater, industry does not get any incentive. Yeah, so they get a lot of incentive when they want to use desalinated water, but for wastewater, they don't get it. And also, I want to take Matthew's comment on, do you think that these rich countries, or the countries which are rich in terms of water resources, or the countries which are poor in water resources, will there be any conflicts on the basis of water resources available?
Payten, you want to tackle the first one?
Yeah, so I'll start off with the first one. I think moving to fulfill Vision 2030, what the kingdom is actively trying to do is to set up more sewage wastewater treatment plants. And to us, it may sound like, why more wastewater treatment plant? And that's because in order to really capture all the wastewater that is produced on a day-to-day basis, we do need those wastewater treatment plants and the sewage connection in order to have those that has been flushed down the toilets to go into a centralized network where they can then undergo treatments sufficiently to a quality that's good enough and then be redistributed to the places for reuse purposes. And in fact, the reason why it's one of the first things that they want to do is because currently we actually do not have a very complete sewage network connection in Saudi Arabia. About 50% of Jeddah city, which is the second largest city, is only connected with the sewage connection. So which means that we are essentially losing about 30 to 50% of the other wastewater that has been generated because they are relying on the septic tanks, which may mean that there is an unintentional dissemination of partially treated wastewater, and those are not captured either through leakage or through unintentional dissemination. So I think that's one of the things that they have identified, which is absolutely needed in order to capture all those 9 million cubic meters that is generated per day so that they can be treated and then they can be reused. With regards to what policies have been, that they would think that in providing incentives or that, I don't know. I mean, like, I'm not involved in that process, but maybe Matt would know.
Well, yeah, there are policies, I'm sure you mentioned. The government is forcing this reuse agenda. So industry's not going to have a choice. They're going to have to be reusing water that's made available to them. So that's one of the Vision 2030 objectives, but the quantification of how much water in agriculture is being used, the reduction of that. There's a fairly extensive list of water policies being enacted. Mm-hmm. But to your second question, I think it's a really excellent question, because from a hydrogeological or geographical perspective, there are probably 4 main hotspots in the world where they commonly come up for water conflict. And one of them may surprise you. If I can get this right, the Tigris-Euphrates is our neighbourhood version. The Tigris-Euphrates rivers. You've got the Nile across the road. So you've got Ethiopia building a massive dam, the Grand Renaissance Dam, that has the potential to reduce the amount of water going through to Sudan and Egypt. There's Tigris-Euphrates, we've got the Nile, there's the Colorado in America. So, the potential for conflict in the US. You've got a Colorado River basin that's very overused, such that when it flows to Mexico, there's no flow. Australia has its own big problems, but we're one nation, so we're unlikely to go to war with ourselves. But the other one would be the Ganges-Brahmaputra, India. The Indus River, India and Pakistan. There's already a water treaty there that India potentially has the potential to cut off the water supply. They've signed an agreement not to do so. That's many decades old. But when you look at water conflicts, the ability of one country to affect the water supply of another, it's an age-old problem, literally age-old problem. One of the first actions that an aggressor would take against a competing nation or a competing village would be to poison the water supply or cut off the water supply. And that the history is filled with those examples. So there was a paper not too long ago that sort of predicted the risk of war related to not just those 4 hotspots, but a slightly larger sample for the next 50 to 100 years. And I don't know what metrics went into that, but it was 50 to 75% chance of a water war by 2050 in one of these conflict zones.
But I think what you're also getting at, Faysal, is like there are wars over resources, precious metals, oil, etc. I think you're also asking the haves and the have-nots, are there going to be wars over water as a resource? Not just a distribution, but is that what you're... I mean, can you give us an example real quick, because then we have to wrap up, but what are some of the areas or the countries that are water-rich?
Well, I think the Ganges-Brahmaputra basin in India, Pakistan, China,
yeah.
This is a basin that has the potential to be very explosive, because you've got multi-billions of people competing for a single water resource, and it's not just water, it's energy. You know, that's the purpose of the Nile Dam, is to get hydroelectricity from it. When you've got downstream basins in the Mekong Delta, you've got China looking to potentially dam part of the Mekong River that's going to affect downstream neighbours. This is a real powder keg for potential conflict. The only way to get around that is to have international treaties that the partners sign up, and this is the Indus treaty that exists between India and Pakistan that they had to sign up with the UN, that they won't cut off the water supply.
On that very positive note, maybe I'll shift it back very quickly. I hope this gives you a taste of a few things today. Number one, that this is a real issue. Obviously, water security, particularly in the kingdom, is an issue. Hopefully you leave today's discussion recognizing that, if you didn't already. Hopefully you know a little bit more about some. This isn't even all of the research. This is some. And I think it was alluded to today. There's this food, water, energy nexus. All of these things really come together. So there is a lot of KAUST research happening and a lot of collaborations in the kingdom on this topic. So hopefully you can leave understanding a little bit more of that. And I encourage you to come back to the next Sci-Café when we start to tease out more of the research that's happening. So please join me in thanking our panelists, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.